Okay, awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, welcome. I see some new names, so that's wonderful. Welcome to all of you. And I just want to make a quick announcement before we get started too. So by now, hopefully you all received the email I sent out this morning. So I'm no longer going to keep reminding you with emails every Monday morning. Well, it's Monday morning, my time, but I'm no longer going to keep reminding you on Mondays about the Q&As. So when you log in now on my new website, hopefully you got that email too. But when you log into my new website, when you're logged in, you'll see on the top Sana Q&A Mondays. When you click on that tab, and that tab is only visible when you're logged in, so not just anyone can see it. But so when you're logged in, you go to that tab, and then it has the same exact access information, like click here, and it'll take you in, and here's the password and whatnot. So it'll just be super easy. I won't be sending out, too many emails, because I know people just get overwhelmed with emails. Like I look at my own emails and there's like so many, like how do you even sift through it all? So I want to make it super simple. It's all just there. Okay, good. Some people said they're trying the new login. It works. Awesome. So I know like the transitions are always a little uncomfortable, like something new, and you got to get used to something new. And it's a little bit bumpy at first, I'm sure, but it's going to get easier. And now this is going to be the site where everything is going to be able to just keep growing. And so having the login area is going to be awesome, because we're going to be able to do some stuff there and create like this sacred and safe space on the internet, for survivors and whatnot. And I did just hear from a programmer who's in the network, and I think he's going to be able to help me to spruce up some things, in the new site, and then hopefully even to create this like chat forum area that I would like to create for you guys all to interact with each other. So that'll be in the future, not immediate, but things are starting to get rolling. So from now on, there's Venus. From now on, you won't be getting the emails every Monday morning. Just to remind you how to find the information, log into the website, go up on top where it says Sana Q&A Mondays, and then you'll find the access information there. So feel free to go ahead. Can you see Venus? Yeah. Venus, you want to say hi? Come here. Come here. She doesn't like when I pick her up. Just say hello, because I can't see you. Say hello. She doesn't like that. Okay. Thank you. So, okay, I'm going to read one question that I got via email, and then you guys can feel free to write questions in the chat. Should we do dogs of Sana? That's awesome. Yeah, dogs are very healing. Very, very healing. So let me read this question, because someone typed this in the comments on the new site, and they asked, how do you deal with the continual PTSD flashbacks? So we may have talked about this a little bit in some of the Sana episodes before. This is like, one of the hardest parts in the immediate aftermath, especially, are the flashbacks that are just, they come out of nowhere. And it's like, the craziest thing is that sometimes we don't even realize those are flashbacks. Like I didn't really realize that until like 8, 9, 10 months ago. I'd heard about flashbacks and PTSD, and I'd always thought of it like in the terms of, people who go to war and they have flashbacks of war, and that sort of thing. And I never realized that like the memories I was having of these relationships with abusive people were flashbacks. Like I didn't click, those two things together. So if you haven't realized that yet, hopefully now you're seeing that when those memories, like they suddenly, like you're washing the dishes or you're brushing your teeth or you're making coffee, and suddenly there's like this bombardment of a memory. Maybe it happened last year, maybe it happened years ago, maybe it happened last month, or yesterday. And in this memory, it's just like it's there. And like it's like your whole nervous system is reliving it. It's like responding, pretty much in the same way as you were responding in the moment. And it's overwhelming. And there's this emotional response. And then, it goes from like the thought to the emotion to like, holy crap, all so fast. So how do you deal with this? So what I recommend to retrain your mind, and this takes like enormous dedication in the beginning, and it's a lot of work in the beginning, and it will get easier and easier. You just have to be diligent with it. You have to be consistent. So every time the memory comes up, what I do now, what really got me through like the initial parts, was like, okay, so the memory comes up and I see it, and, and I'm experiencing the feelings, and it's probably like anger or rage, toward this person. And maybe there's even like regret. I should have done this. I should have said that. I should have, shitting all over yourself. Right. And so looking at that memory again and saying, okay, you know, you're an asshole and that was abusive and that wasn't okay. And I'm allowed to be angry about this. It's okay that I'm angry. This is righteous anger. This is anger in the response to abuse towards someone hurting me. However, I also acknowledge that this anger is just going to keep poisoning me if I don't deal with it. So, knowing now what I know, if I had been back there, I would have done something different. So knowing now what I know, and again, you're phrasing it like knowing now what I know versus I really regret and I should have, right? Because that's a different kind of intent. But knowing now what I know, I would have said blah, 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 right to your face. Or knowing now what I know, I would have turned around and walked right out, And so this kind of like starts to empower you where it doesn't feel like a regret, like, oh, I screwed up, I should have done this, or I could have done that. But reframing it in the way of, okay, knowing what I know now, I'm empowered with this, knowledge. I would do this if I were to ever see anything like that again. And, your mind, your subconscious mind can't tell the difference between what's really happening and what you're imagining is happening because the same process is happening in your nervous system. That's just how the subconscious mind works. And that's the connection with the physical body, why it feels like you're actually living it again when you have the flashbacks. So if you switch that and you switch the emotional intent, the emotional feeling that you're going in there with, like, okay, I acknowledge my anger. I acknowledge that I'm allowed to feel angry. I'm angry about that. And, I know that anger is just going to keep hurting me long term. I'm just going to allow you to keep hurting me with the anger that I'm holding on to, right? I can't change the past. And that's like the empowerment here is when you look at that past memory and you're like, okay, that happened. I can't change that. I can only shift my perspective of that now. Because if my perspective is, poor me, it's so awful, I'm just so angry towards this person and I'm never ever going to forgive them, then who's losing in this situation? Me. Because I'm holding on to the anger, because it's poisoning me, it's eating at me, it's destroying my body. And then I'm projecting this vibe out like, I'm an angry person. Come on, do something to me, make me angry. I'll show you how angry I am, right? And it becomes like this negative feedback loop. So you really have to be able to shift that. And, it requires being willing to give up, the victim status of that. The victim status is I was hurt and you hurt me. And so, acknowledge your anger and acknowledge that you're not wrong for having that anger. It's totally normal and natural to have anger in response to abuse. However, choosing to hold on to that anger long-term is only going to eat you alive, not them. It's not going to make the karma right. It's not going to fix anything. I mean, if anything, you're going to start to have like actual physiological problems because of the anger. So that's how I would rewrite the flashbacks. Like every time they come up, like, deal with the emotion that's coming up. Possibly it's anger. Maybe it's something much deeper. Maybe you've processed through the initial phases of the anger, because the anger is like the gateway emotion. It's the strong emotion. It's the protective emotion. What's hiding below the anger is the more vulnerable emotion. That's the shame, the despair, the loss, the grief, these kinds of more vulnerable emotions. And so, maybe that's what's coming up. And so, acknowledge that, like, I feel sad and it's okay that I feel sad. This is why I feel sad. And I'm not going to let you keep running my life anymore. So this is what I would do right now. If you were standing in front of me doing that thing right now, this is what I would do. Or if this thing were happening right now, this is what I would do instead. And it sends this message of empowerment to your subconscious. Your subconscious recognizes that. And again, it can't differentiate between what you're imagining and what's really happening. So if you're imagining, well, if this is happening right now, this is what I'm doing. And then suddenly your nervous system, your whole emotional state, your feeling state, your physiological state starts to shift, right? So it may not be that the very first time you're like, whoa, that works really amazing. You might notice a slight, like you're getting off the hook a little bit. You're getting more off the hook a little bit. Maybe, and as you keep doing this, you're going to notice the flashbacks don't come nearly as intensely because you're dealing with it. Like the trauma only survives in the darkness and what's hidden. And the flashbacks are part of the trauma. The flashbacks are the trauma trying to break through, like trying to get your conscious attention, trying to get you to deal with it. So it doesn't go away if you just ignore it or push it away, because the more you push it away, the more it's going to push back, because it's just going to fester under there. So, allow it to come up and acknowledge how you feel about it, and then empower yourself with, if this is happening right now, this is what I'm doing right now. Like knowing what I know now, this is the action that I would take. And over time, you will notice this makes a huge difference. Again, it's not like a magic pill. It doesn't happen like this, but it will change things over time. Okay, let me check up here. Someone says, can only be a victor or a victim, difficult to move out of a victim status though? Okay, I think I see what you're saying. I think you're saying, you can either be like a survivor, a victor, a survivor, right? Or a thriver, or the victim. You can't be both. And that's true, right? And it is hard to move out of the victim status if it's serving you in some way, and in the immediate aftermath, or until you hear of these ideas, it almost seems like, well, like how is it even possible? Like you were hurt. Like that's never going to change. You can't change what happened. And that's true. You can't change what happened, but are you going to allow that to own you now? Are you going to allow that to run your life now? Are you going to give that person that much power over your life? That's the question to ask yourself. And that's the question that I had to ask myself. I was like, whoa, I don't like this at all. I don't like feeling like this at all. I don't want to feel like I'm a victim, because that feels horrible. And then I'm just going to keep attracting more experiences where I can feel like a victim again, because that's what I'm identifying with, right? So that's when I had to really realize, I don't want to identify with that anymore, which means that you got to let go of that blame, right? It doesn't mean it was your fault. The abuse was not your fault, right? But letting go of that blame of just, you're the bad guy and you're all wrong, and turning it back on, to the empowerment of, okay, this is how I really feel, and being real and honest with yourself. This is how I really feel about that. And this is what I would do now, knowing what I know. And that will start to pull you out of that victim status. It will start to shift your whole subconscious and the way your subconscious is looking at those memories. And then those memories aren't going to be invading as much as they have been, with the emotional flashbacks that are happening. That will decrease a lot, and it might be years down the road. It might be like every once a year or something, you have like one memory, one flashback of that abuse or that person. And it's like, oh, right. Okay. So that's still there. So, what can I do with that now? And that's the point of empowerment, is you can't change the past. You can only shift your perspective now. That is the point of healing, where you shift your perspective. That's where everything changes, so that's what you got to work towards, is shifting the perspective of what happened, because you can't change the past, and that really empowers you here and now in the present moment and moving forward. Someone asked privately, can I get past the feeling of feeling betrayed for being so good to him and being so wrong about his intentions? I feel so stupid. I realize he just played me and used me. He lied about everything. I now wonder if he lied about his childhood sexual abuse to get me to feel sorry for him, which is how I excuse most of his outrageous behavior. He told me when we met that he wanted a friend, and that's what I tried to be. He's totally taken advantage and used me for money, help with his job, etc. 2 weeks ago, he said I deserved to be sexually abused, that I should kill myself, brought up my deceased parents, that I'm insane, not worth anything, etc. He texted me a week ago and said, can I throat fuck you, after he told me to kill myself. I went no contact a week ago, but I'm so confused and hurt. So yeah, that is a very abusive situation. And I'm really happy that you got out of that a week ago. That must be still very, very, very raw and recent for you. And I want to give you, a pat on the back for being strong enough to go no contact, to make that decision, because I understand how confusing it is when you're in it. And how deeply hurt you are by what he said. Like, those are horrible threats. What he said to you is awful, awful things to say to a human being. And you don't have to put up with that ever, ever again, not from him and not from anyone else. That's not normal. That's not healthy. And there is no amount of past experiences that excuses a person from behaving like that now towards you. That is not your fault. You weren't the cause of what happened to him in his childhood. It's not your fault. And it's not right that he throws that on you. It's not your responsibility to fix him, to heal him, to take the brunt of his abuse because it makes him feel better to transfer that pain to someone else. So you made a good decision going no contact. I would be really, really certain that you have cut him completely off of everything, blocked him on all social media, blocked him off your phone, like get a new phone number, if you need to, because he, if he's going to start calling from other numbers or trying to get a hold of you from someone else's phone, be very cautious in your physical surroundings. If this person is violent, if he's threatening this kind of thing towards you, it's possibly someone, suppressing a lot of violence. I would be very cautious. And, your initial question, how can I get past the feeling of feeling betrayed for being so good to him and being so wrong about his intentions? You said you feel so stupid. Like pretty much every survivor will say that at some point, like, I feel so stupid. I felt that way too. I feel so stupid. Why didn't I see it? Why didn't I do something different? Blah, blah, blah. I feel so stupid, right? And the reality is that you were conned. Like that was deception. And that's how deception works, right? It's like if deception works, you don't know what's happening. So that was deception. And that's what was supposed to happen from a deceiver. That's what they do. It was not your fault. Like it wouldn't have been deception if you realized what was going on. Right. And so like, of course you didn't realize, like most people don't realize until it's like way down the road. And then somehow even they don't realize until someone, they see a word, like a keyword, like narcissistic abuse, or someone says, hey, that sounds pretty abusive, or that sounds like emotional abuse, or someone clues you in on what's going on. Because when you're in it and you're in the Stockholm Syndrome, the trauma bond, like you can't see it. You're in survival mode, so you're in denial about the reality because you're just trying to get through. And so, there were physiological processes, there were psychological processes, like there were a lot of things involved. And that's why you didn't see it. It was not your fault. Try not to beat yourself up for that. Like you were betrayed. You were deceived by that person, by what they did. Because that's who they are. That's who that person is. Like whether it was you or the next person or the one before or how many ever people, that's who they are. And that's how they're going to be. Like that's who they are in the world. Right. And now so now that one, there are people like that out there. Like there actually are people like that out there. They're not like you. They don't have a conscience that works like you. They don't feel guilt for doing the wrong thing. They know the wrong thing. They know right from wrong, but their conscience doesn't work like yours, so they make the decision to do wrong and they don't feel guilty about it. They don't feel bad. In fact, they're going to pass off the responsibility and the blame and the fault to you or to whomever else, because it can't be their fault in their reality paradigm, and the thing is like, you were good to him, right? Because that's who you are, right? So when you acknowledge like, I did the best I could do. I showed up there with everything I had. I was the person that I wanted to be, and I gave this person love, and I gave this person the benefit of the doubt, and I gave this person forgiveness, and I gave this person compassion. And you just go through this and you're like, yeah, I gave a lot. And in some ways it's like, it's not fair because you gave all this and then you got this instead. But the reality is that what you gave shows you who you are. Shows you the kind of quality person that you are. And what he gave and what he did shows you who he is, and there are people like that out there. And now you know that. And so now you're going to recognize that, you're educating yourself on what the red flags are, now that you've been in the experience, firsthand what it starts to look like. And the more you reflect on that, like the more clear things probably are. Like even when you look at the beginning of that relationship, now maybe you start to see, oh, right. So when that happened, okay, that was the clue and that was the clue, but you just didn't see it at the time because you didn't imagine it. You didn't imagine somebody would be doing these sorts of things to you, or, maybe if you had grown up in it, it was just normal. Like you just accepted that humans were like that, and you should just be forgiving, and you should just keep extending, over and over again, your compassion and your love and your understanding to this person who's abusing it. It could have been that, or it just could have been like, it just came out of nowhere and just shocked you, and you just didn't even imagine anyone do that. Regardless, there are people like that out there, and this is what they do. So don't beat yourself up for that. All of us are here because we all got played like that. We were all deceived like that. And that was the point of their deception. It was to get what they wanted, and they didn't care who they hurt in the process. You're not stupid. Like I probably have mentioned this several times. Like I hear from so many people in my network who have advanced degrees, like multiple master's degrees, PhDs, MDs, JDs, and they tell me, I'm not stupid. Like I'm really intelligent. How did I fall for this? I don't understand. I feel, and I'm like, yeah, because it's not about intelligence. Like there are physiological, psychological, subconscious survival mechanisms that kick in that like your conscious mind isn't even aware of. The conscious mind is approximately like 12% of our awareness, right? So like we don't see it coming. We don't realize what's happening. It's not your fault. And it's very fresh for you right now, 1 week out, very, very raw and fresh. And it's going to get better over time. I really encourage you to stay no contact. That's going to keep you out of the confusion. If you allow him any opportunity to get into your life again, even if it seems like he's being sweet and, repenting of what happened and regretful of what he did, don't fall for that. That's a trap. You know who he is now. That will hook you back in, and then you'll be right back in the abuse cycle. So, your power moving forward now over him in that situation is the no contact. And that is the safest way for you to move forward, so that you can get out of the brain fog, so you can get out of the confusion, so you can start to lift your self-worth and your self-esteem. You can start to get clarity of mind again. The more distance and space you have from that, the more clarity your mind will come back. The more honest you are with yourself, the more clarity in your mind will come back. The more you hang out with, other survivors, and you listen to other stories, and you educate yourself online, the more you're going to realize like, it wasn't your fault at all. Like there's millions of people who have been and are victims, targets of this kind of abuse. You're not alone. So many people got hooked into that and just didn't see what was coming. That's just the nature of it. So I'm sending you a big, big hug, because that was a very traumatizing experience. Someone else types in here, I'm currently going through the silent treatment at this moment. I just want him to stay gone, but he just won't. I can't go no contact. I have 3 young kids with him. I'm really struggling with the anxiety of him showing up. Every car I hear, I jump, and I'm really struggling with what to do when he does come back. I just don't know how to keep him away and how to get through this. I'm not working because he always did, but now he isn't working, and I feel literally trapped. Any advice on what to do in this moment? Okay, so you have children with him. Now, when a person has children with one of these types, then you need to use the gray rock technique, because you can't go totally no contact if you're sharing the kids, especially if there's like a legal agreement on custody. And I'm not sure if you have a legal agreement on custody. But if you are sharing these kids and you have some agreement like that, then you want to do the gray rock. So I would make it extremely clear that he does not enter your house. You don't enter his. You don't touch his property. He doesn't touch yours, and he is not allowed into your house. And you're, not going to step foot into his. And make the boundaries really clear. That however you exchange the kids, whether it's in the driveway or whether you decide that's not even safe. Maybe you decide like a public place. Like halfway between you and him or something, in a Walmart parking lot where there are cameras, maybe you choose that as your safe place to exchange the kids, when it's his turn or your turn. And maybe that will also start to reduce the anxiety of him showing up. I don't know if you saw this one video I did, something about, like getting your emotional security back after they're there. And then the triggers of the sounds, like maybe you hear their car keys, or you hear the diesel engine in the driveway, or you hear the garage door go up, or any of these things. And it like sends you into like this panic and anxiety thing, right? So you want to avoid that as much as possible. So, if you're getting anxiety just thinking about him showing up on your doorstep, then that tells you that's not a safe place for you to exchange the kids. You need to come up with a place in public, and maybe even a place where there's many cameras around, just in case something gets violent and crazy, then maybe the police then could get the camera footage or something like that. So to reduce that kind of panic and anxiety that's coming at you, I would protect that space. I would tell him no more coming to the house, none of that. And when you make your boundary really clear like that, whether you're sharing kids or not, if he doesn't respect that boundary and he tries to like come into your house or something like this, and you asked him and you put it in writing, right? Don't come to the house anymore. This is the new boundary. And if he violates that boundary, then, you can go ahead and get a protection order that will protect you. And then something will have to happen in the state where they will have to, do the child exchange with supervision or something of that nature. I don't know how that works in every state, but I would create this sacred space where you tell him these are the boundaries, and from now on this is the boundary, and this is how we exchange the kids. That way it doesn't look like you're actively working against him, to have contact with the kids, as long as he hasn't shown any kind of like physical violence toward the children or towards you. If there's physical violence, then you need to go get a protection order, because that's not safe for you or the kids, but in this case, I would just make that very, very clear and then follow through. Like if you tell him, here's the boundary, don't come here, and if he comes here, then take video footage, take photo image, like anything you can get as proof, and then go get yourself a protection order. But don't waffle on that, because if you don't follow through with your boundary, if you don't enforce your boundary, he's going to keep pushing that, and he's going to keep taking advantage, and then he's going to try more sneaky things, to do. And then in terms of the gray rock technique, this is what you do if you are stuck in a situation like this where you can't totally go no contact because it's the parent of your kids. So from then on, the gray rock technique in your case would be only talking about the children, like meeting at this time to exchange the kids and how long you're going to have the kids, and any detail about the kids, and that's it. And nothing about your life, like nothing about your personal life, nothing about your emotional life, nothing about the past that the two of you shared together, nothing about your interactions. Even just don't even entertain those things. Maybe he puts it out there and you just ignore that. Okay, see you at 2:00 in the Walmart parking lot, exchange the kids, whatever that is, and just leave it about the kids, and that's it, nothing more. Don't let him provoke you. Don't let him say things that makes you angry and gives a response, because he will push for any emotional response. He'll try something nice and sweet, and if you don't respond to that, then he'll go for something dirty and mean, or back and forth. But don't give him either and any response. Just totally neutral, just like they call it flat affect, right? Just make your face like poker face, just totally neutral. Even if inside like you're dying, or inside like you're just like livid, get through the moment, put on the straight face, stare him in the eyes. And when you get to safety and in a lone space, that's where you work out the emotional thing that's left over from that. But don't give that to him. Be unopinionated. Don't have strong opinions about anything, especially things that he knows that, you get all fired up about. He's going to push those buttons. Just pretend like you don't even care about that thing, whether it was like a sports thing that you're into, or like, any kind of thing about life, whatever you're really fired up about, he's going to try to push that. So be unopinionated, be uninteresting. There's nothing interesting going on in your life. Don't act like anything interesting is going on. And just be totally boring, and only talking about the kids, nothing more. And that will start to create very clear boundaries around the communication. He's going to try to go all around that boundary, but you just have to hold and enforce that boundary very, very clearly and very strongly. And then when you get home to your own space, that's where you can go work things out, process the emotion and how you felt about that, and, work that out. But don't do that with him. Don't give him that, because he will use that as a form of control over you. Um, okay. Someone says, I'm coming to believe that the recovery process is accelerating these days due to people getting help more easily via the internet. It seems to break the hold of isolation. That alone, this coming out is a seminal event in recovery, I suspect. Yeah, it is amazing just how recently so much is coming out. Like, it's really, if you look at the videos and the dates of the videos, it's really only been in the last 5 years. And then really like in the last 2 years, you see this tremendous, increase in information that's out there, which means, that many more people are realizing, and that many more people are getting in contact with that information. They're realizing what's happening or what happened to them. So yeah, I think that the more the information gets out there, the more people know, the more they're going to be aware of it, and the less people are going to fall into these traps. Like, even if you look on like dating sites and stuff, like now people are starting to talk about this. Maybe they don't call it narcissistic abuse, maybe they call it emotional abuse or something, but essentially they're talking about the same thing. And so people are starting to become savvy of this. And yeah, it breaks that hold of the isolation. The isolation is an important aspect of the abuse. They have to isolate you. It could be physically, but certainly psychologically, they want to isolate you from the perspectives of outside people, because outside people looking in are going to go, something's not right there. That doesn't feel good. That feels abusive. Are you sure that's okay? They're going to have questions, and they can plant these questions in your mind. The abuser does not want that. So yeah, the more awareness that's out there, the more information that's out there, the less alone people will feel, the more the support networks, are out there too, the more people have contact with other people who have been through it and not feel so alone. And yeah, that is a huge part of the recovery, where you realize you're not alone. You realize there's all these other people out there, and it's like you get validation from one another. Like they weren't in your experience and you weren't in theirs, but you don't even have to like explain your whole experience. You can explain like this much and they're like, oh my God, I totally get that. It was like this for me. And then you guys are like, oh my God, we totally understand each other. Right. So, that is the benefit of having the support network of people who have been through it. Someone writes a private question. I have a question about Stockholm Syndrome. I think that kept me going on with this person. How do I deal with that in my recovery and in the future? How can I recognize it the next time if it happens subconsciously? Okay, I did a couple videos on this. Check those out if you haven't seen them. But to give you like an idea here, so the Stockholm Syndrome is the trauma bond. That will get strengthened with any contact you have with the abuser, whether it's positive or negative. And even this could be like you creeping on a Facebook page and looking at his photos. It can trigger you back into that. Okay. Or you talking to somebody else in your network who's still, a friend of his or hers, and then they relay some information to you, and then that triggers the whole response. Whether it was positive or negative, it doesn't matter. That's the importance of no contact, to stay out of the trauma bond, to keep that broken, to not get sucked back into the Stockholm Syndrome. Because, all they have to do is say one thing and it could trigger you. It could trigger you into the anxiety state because it's like something negative that they're saying, or they could be saying something positive and then you're hooked right back in it. And then all they have to do is flip it back, which they will, because that's the abuse cycle. Sweet, mean, right? And so either way, it's going to be negative. So don't have any contact. That's like the most important thing, is to stop yourself. That's primarily a boundary that you have with yourself, because, you can block him or her, and try to keep that all off your radar. But if you can't help yourself from going into your old photos and looking at a photo, you get into trouble. So you want to purge all of that. I call all of that paraphernalia. So this paraphernalia of an addiction, maybe they left their sweatshirt around, or their jewelry, or photos or letters or emails or text messages or screenshots, like whatever that is, get it out. If they gave you something, it was a gift, to you, but every time you look at that thing, you think of that person, get rid of it, give it to Goodwill, sell it, something, get rid of it. If you still have a ring from that person, get rid of it, but get that stuff out of your life, because it's a temptation to pull you back in. So that is like the most important step to staying out of the Stockholm Syndrome, to staying out of the trauma bond, is no contact whatsoever, not even the little things like looking at their photos or, like hoping that you'll run into them or something like that. Also, I just did another recent video last week from one of the other people in the support network. His name is Arthur Fields, and he had let me do a video on a post that he had posted, and he now has a blog as of this weekend. But I made that, and it was about like, you know, how essentially like if you're doing these things, like you're not actually no contact. You might be thinking that you're no contact, but you're still in that toxic cycle. So check that video out if you haven't seen it, because it's like these are the ways that our mind kind of like tries to deceive us and fool us into thinking that we're no contact, you know, but like we drive by their house, or like we drive by their work, you know, or we go and hang out somewhere where they used to hang out, and like maybe just maybe they'll show up. Like these are just ways that like we deceive ourselves and trick ourselves into thinking that we're no contact, but we're actually looking for the contact, and that's going to keep you in that place. So that is the most important thing that I would recommend to staying out of the Stockholm Syndrome, is the no contact. Someone says here, to the current questioner, okay, I think this was about the woman with children. Do you think it could help to file a report with police to set up a paper trail in case he gets violent or stalks you? Also, I feel better about my falling for the tricks when I act from my current knowing, which is accepting the end as deranged as they are. Okay, so that was for the first person, not the kids. So yeah, that's a good idea. You know, if this person has potential violence, or he was violent in the past, you know, then make sure that you have that paper trail of any like these threats that he made to you, and like wishing that these bad things would happen to you. You know, do you have that in writing? Is there any way you can save that just in case? And, you know, if you feel the need for it, to get a protection order from this person. And then she also says, she feels better about falling for the tricks when she can act from her current knowing, which is accepting that the narc is as deranged as they are. You know, that truth, like accepting that truth, like that person is really, really, really has a problem. They're character disturbed. They have a major personality disorder, and you can't fix that, you know, and they're probably not going to get help, and they're probably never going to change. And when you accept who they are, it's like, it's very freeing. It's very liberating, you know, and then it also helps you to stop looking for the hope that things will change, you know. But like this person says, you know, if there's any question that possibly he's physically violent, then I would go ahead and get a protection order if you can. You know, I know it can be complicated, and it, you know, it can be really stressful when you have to go in there, and like, sometimes you even have to go to court with this person. Like if they don't just automatically give it to you, sometimes both people have to show up to court, and you could end up having to see him in court. That's happened. It happened to me once. It was really traumatizing. But sometimes you have to go through that. Sometimes you have to stand up and put that boundary out, especially when you're dealing with someone who has physical violence, you know, because then you're not safe. And then you have to get the police, you know, to have some sort of protection order. And then if that person violates it, like they can go to jail if they violate that protection order. You know, you can't violate that protection order. Like you can't reach out and contact him, or even if he tries to contact you, you can't respond. You have to withhold your part of that, or I think in most states it probably just becomes null and void, you know. And so you have to hold that boundary, you know, but make sure that if he's breaking that, then you notify the police, you get proof of that, and then he will go to jail. He won't be allowed to keep doing that. Okay. So I think that person who asked that question earlier says privately, thank you for advice. It's so helpful. What's crazy is that he's a teacher and coach and now a principal, which I helped him become, and has this great reputation in the community, but he's sadistic in private. Do you think he may use some pics that he took against me? He's really unstable now that I see. I'm almost paranoid that he will seek revenge now that I went no contact. So this is the biggest fear that all survivors have usually, is that they're going to, if you leave and you cut them off, or you try to expose them, or something happens, that they're going to try to get revenge on you. Or if you try to go get, you know, police protection, or if you try to tell the truth to someone, it's like, we always have this fear that they're going to try to retaliate and get revenge for us, either breaking it off or cutting them off or telling somebody else the truth about what happened. And it could happen that they try to retaliate. Sometimes it does. Sometimes they just moved on, to another source. And what you talked about him, having this great reputation in the community, this is like very often what happens, especially with the covert types, like with the sociopaths and with the covert narcissists. They're often in positions of power. Like you're talking about the school. I mean, I've heard from guys who told me that their ex was like some high up person. She was abusive, and she was some high up person in like domestic violence organizations. I've heard from men and women who were involved with a minister who's like leading a religious organization and like worshiped and admired by people in that community. And they're a very destructive, toxic human being. So, I mean, these people are often in these kinds of positions, and that's the crazy part. And that's also the danger of trying to like expose them, because most people just don't want to hear what you have to say. Most people are smitten. They're in the Stockholm Syndrome, even if they're not in like the romantic, intimate relationship, they can still be in the Stockholm Syndrome with the idea of this person, the figure of this person in their school or their organization or their society. And so, if as long as you're not, and this is why you don't want to be out there, in public or on social media, like talking about him and like trying to like spread all this information, even though it could be the truth, what you're trying to share, that could also make him want to attack you much worse. And so it's usually best just to go no contact and cut off and resist the desire to get even, or to like, out him in front of his community or something, because it could go really bad. Like that's when they have nothing to lose, and they could really attack you. And yeah, they could use things against you. So if I were you, I would just stay no contact, just don't even try to go there. Yeah, it is crazy that he's in that position, but unfortunately there's really nothing you can do about it. And trying to like bring other people's attention to that could be really, really dangerous for you. So it's really best just to stay away. Likely he would never do anything with those photos. If you're not out trying to get him, he's probably just not going to do anything with anything that he has, any private personal information about you, because he's not trying to look like the bad guy. That's one thing to remember too, is when these people are in these positions, like they definitely don't want negative attention on them. They don't want anything coming back to them. So they're not going to really stick their head out. If you make it easy for them, then they'll follow through, but just don't go there. Don't try to get even though I know it feels totally unfair. Totally unfair and wrong and everything, but just don't take that into your hands, because then you'll, one, be carrying that heavy negative karma, and it will come back to you somehow, even though originally, he hurt you, but also because it could drive him, to take more action. And likely his reputation is much more important to him. As long as you're not out there, publicly destroying his reputation, probably he's not going to follow through with any of that. Someone says privately, the narcissist I encountered was my English professor at university, who was targeting skinny, beautiful, and mainly blonde female students. I fitted into that because I was struggling with anorexia and bulimia for months. I never felt special in my life. Being so thin gave me something to be proud of and made me stand out. My mother also had issues with food and her body image. She never paid attention to me because I didn't look super skinny or beautiful during my teenage years. I was the awkward nerd who was into comic books and animes, maybe. I realize now that I replayed this feeling of wanting attention and wanting to be special to my mother with him. He made me feel so special in the beginning. Of course, I later found out that he was sleeping with a lot of other students. Still, now that I've more or less overcome my eating disorder through adopting a vegan diet, I gained weight and don't feel special or attractive anymore. I'm still in the confused state of questioning myself and intentions. And for who am I doing the things for that I am doing, like eating well and working out, putting on makeup, and so on. Also, I am questioning whether I did really study and work that hard on my university studies for myself or for the professor. I think I did it for him, which is really sad to admit. I don't really know my own interests. I only feel motivated to do stuff only for myself. I know that sounds horrible, but it is my truth at this moment. What can I do to improve this? Okay, So you don't feel motivated to do stuff for yourself. You're talking about how, this person was like, it was like he kind of encouraged you, or because of him, you wanted to do better or be better, get good grades or do well in school or look attractive or take care of yourself. And so, you also mentioned going back to your mom and how, this person made you feel special. And it was like you were dying to have that feeling because you never felt that feeling growing up from your mom. And then in walks the savior, the hero, right? And it's like he's offering you everything that you didn't get as a child. And he knows that. He knows that because this sort of thing happened to a lot of people, where they come in and they're asking you questions, and like they're finding out things, and they're finding out exactly where your vulnerabilities and where your holes are. And that's where they're going to come in as the savior and the hero. And then you're going to transfer your sense of approval to them because you like what they're saying. You like how you feel when they're giving you that attention, and so that's where you got to turn that barometer inward. That approval and that validation and that motivation, it comes intrinsically. It comes from inside. Seeking it outside will only lead to danger. If you're doing things only because of other people, then it's not going to last. It's not going to be like a real long-term change. It might be something you do for a period of time to please someone or to gain their favor in some way, but it's not, maybe doesn't even really resonate with you, or if you just want to look good for other people, then, it's like you're always seeking their approval of things. And then if maybe you look all amazing and clearly you look amazing, but today this person decides, I'm going to put her down, or I'm going to put him down today. And I'm going to tell you that, this isn't perfect about you, or that's not good enough about you, or, if only you were like this or that, you would be a lot more attractive, or, it just leaves the open for them to say something like that. So, you really got to get to that point where you're turning that barometer inward, where you're giving yourself that approval, where you're finding the motivation from yourself. Like you're becoming a better person because you want to become a better person, and it's okay to look back and say, okay, so because of that person, even though they came with all this abuse and everything, if there's anything positive I can extract, it's because, he really pushed me to look at this aspect of my life, and turns out I wasn't happy with that aspect of my life either. Turns out he hit on something that I didn't do just to please him, but I was, improving that thing about myself because I wasn't happy with myself in that way. And so now I'm working on this thing, but I'm doing it for me, not for him. I'm doing it because I like myself better now that I'm eating well and exercising well and, doing whatever that thing is, right? So if you can look at that as a blessing and as a lesson, like, okay, he taught me that. That's interesting. He pointed that out and I own that. And now I'm doing this for me. Now I'm eating a vegan diet and I'm exercising and, I'm taking care of myself and I go out in public and I feel good about myself. And no, you're not getting the attention of people, who are like, look at the skinny girl, like the skinniest girl of everyone. It won't be like that, because you're not going to have anorexia anymore, but you're going to be attractive and you're going to radiate that and you're going to radiate health. Right? And you're going to feel amazing. You're going to have amazing energy because you're taking care of yourself. You're taking care of your nutrition. You're taking care of your exercise. You're making yourself look attractive to yourself in the mirror. So when you go out there, you feel amazing, about yourself. And then it doesn't matter what people think, if they think you're wearing the wrong color of eyeshadow or you did your hair in an unattractive way, or they don't like the shirt that you're wearing, too bad. That's their thing. That's not about you, and you go out there and you own your thing. You own who you are. And so look at it like, okay, maybe they encouraged you to look at some things about yourself that you didn't like about yourself. And, one of the first things realizing that, if you feel like your parent didn't give you that attention that you deserved and you were desperately looking for that from someone else, and then you found someone else who took advantage of that, how can you be there more for yourself? How can you give yourself that attention more? I don't know if the word is attention or if it's love or if it's nurturing, but whatever that word is for you, figure out what that is and then figure out how you're not doing that for yourself. And what's one way that you can start doing that now? Like, what is one way that you can change that right now? One thing you can start doing for yourself right now that would make you start to feel like you're giving yourself that attention. like you're giving yourself that nourishment, like you're giving yourself that love. And so being able to be there for yourself is the antidote for looking for it for someone else. When you give yourself that approval, when you give yourself that validation, when you give yourself that honesty, like, okay, I really don't like this thing about myself. And, maybe it's like you want to lose 5 pounds or something, whatever it is, okay, I don't like this thing about myself. So I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to stop drinking soda, or I'm going to stop eating chips at night. And instead I'm going to walk 30 minutes every day. And this is what I'm going to do for me, whatever that is for you, but make up that thing for you and not for someone else, because you want to feel good, because you want to be your best, not because it's a competition with someone else, and not because you're desperately looking for someone else to give you the attention, but because you're giving it to yourself. And then the right people start showing up. When you're radiating that, other people are like, wow, that's awesome. What are you doing? Like, you look amazing. What are you doing? Oh, I'm trying this new vegan diet, and I'm doing this new exercise, and I do feel pretty good about myself, and that sort of thing will start to happen. And sure, you might meet people who are jealous and resentful. There will always be haters, and the way I look at that is like, just don't invest in that, and use their message of hatred as a fuel for your motivation. If someone is trying to tell you to be small, or someone is trying to tell you that you're not good enough or whatever, just decide that, one, that person doesn't know who you are. Two, they don't get to decide who you are. That means nothing, because that comes from inside. And three, whatever it is that they're saying, pretty sure you can take that and transmute it in some way and utilize that as motivation to move forward. So make it about you. Maybe you were just taught that way, that you just didn't do stuff for yourself, that you always had to do it to please someone else or to meet someone else's requirement. And now it's time for you to be there for you, because if so many of us got into these situations because we didn't really understand who we were. We didn't have a real clear sense of self, probably because we grew up, in that kind of situation. And so now as an adult, discover who you are. Because the more you know who you are, the more you know who other people are. The quicker you're going to recognize the red flags, because you know who you are. And that doesn't feel right. And the more you know who you are, the less you care about what other people think of you. Because you can walk into a room of 100 people and there could be 100 different opinions of who you are. And none of those could be who you really are. Only you know who you really are, and maybe some of your close friends know who you are. Maybe some other people get glimpses into who you are. But really what most matters is, are you happy with who you are? Do you know who you are? Who are you really? And that's what you want to discover. What do you like? What are you interested in? What is important to you? What matters to you? What do you love and value? These are all things that you want to investigate so that you are living in your sense of self. Because the more solid you are with your sense of self, you're not going to allow someone else to tell you who you are, or to tell you that who you are is not good enough, or not sexy enough, or not whatever enough, right? Because you're going to hear that. You're going to be like, ugh, bye. No, thank you. 7 billion people in the world. Why would I want to hang out with this person, right? So when you know who you are, you're going to feel amazing. You're going to radiate that out. You're going to attract very different things. And even when, that kind of stuff comes across the radar, you're quickly going to see that and smell it and say, no, thanks. I'm not buying into that. Someone says here, I am learning more today just from the experiences of others today. These types of individuals are very deceiving and have no morals, and it's very sad that they will hurt innocent people and try to ruin their lives out of spite, and they thrive off of others' suffering. Yeah, that is the reality of it. And I'm really glad that you're learning today, and that, you're seeing other people have had very similar experiences, and, all of us were deceived. Like, that is the nature of deception. That's what the definition of deception works. If it works, it's deceiving. You don't see it coming. That's what it is. And it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Someone else is here. This just does so much good. Sometimes I wish for more, but I was years and years in isolation trying to dope it out. I'm very thankful for this and other resources now. Yeah, the support network is very, very helpful. Oh, okay. So the person from before, I think this is the person who shares children, says he lives here technically. He won't get his own place. Okay, that is a really bad situation. So if this was your place, like it's legally your place, like if you're the only one on the lease or something like that, then you're going to need to get him out of there. if he won't get his own place, you may end up needing to take this to the authorities, like getting, a restraining order or something like this to get him out of there. Sometimes the easiest way to do this, like if you have invited that person into your space and they won't leave, sometimes the easiest way to get them out is to make them think that it's their idea, and then they run. Like, you know him really well. If there's any way, and like this is manipulative, and it's a counter manipulation. It's like counterterrorism, right? It's like when you know the tactics that the enemy is using, sometimes you have to use some tactics, against them to get them to get away. So, being slightly manipulative in the way of like, now it's survival time and you need to get safe and you need to have a safe and sacred space for you and your kids. So, how could you manipulate his mind in some way to get him to think that it was his idea to leave? Like, is there something you can say or something you can do that's going to make him want to run? Like, did he ever threaten leaving before or walking away if you didn't do something? Like, is there any way that you can convince him that it's his idea, and then he gets out and then you change the locks and it's over? If that's not going to work out and it's too complicated and you don't want to do that and all that, it's just a big mess, then maybe you need to sneak out and get away. The best way, I think, to leave a psychopath, one of these abusive types, is to sneak away, to plan everything clandestinely, not tell them anything, get everything worked out, get the exit plan worked out, figure out how you're going to move. Like, are you hiring movers, or is family coming in and sweeping you out? And when is he going to be gone? Is he predictably gone from this hour to this hour on certain days? That's when you move. You move when he's at work, or you move when he's not around, or he's out of town or something. And then he comes home to an empty house, and that's it. You got your stuff out. You left everything of his. Don't bother his stuff. Don't give him anything to come after you for. Just take what's yours, and for your kids, and get your stuff out. So one way or the other, it sounds like you need to take some action to either get out of that situation, or to create, this idea that it's his idea, and to get him out of your space, if that was your place. But if I were you, I would meditate on that, reflect on that, maybe for a couple of days, and really feel that out and see, what is the easy way out of this? Try to make it as simple as possible, as non-complicated as possible, as clear as possible. What are the options and what direction can you take? And then make a plan, and then plan everything quietly, and, and just do it that way. I'm really sorry. It's so exasperating when they won't get out of your space. It's always easier just to leave. I think it's so much more complicated when they've come into your space and they won't leave. That's when it gets really complicated. So, hopefully one of those strategies will work for you. Someone else was commenting about the isolation from earlier. I'm sorry, I'm just catching up now. And they were saying it's a huge fear of theirs too. It really is, for all survivors. And I think that's part of the reason why people are often so afraid to talk about the truth, because you feel so isolated. You feel like no one's going to believe you. It's so like fantastical. Like, how could that really have happened? When you're telling someone else, and then fearing that they're going to attack you for that, and that you're going to be all alone. So yeah, getting involved in a support network will really help you to understand that you are not alone. There are so many people who went through this. Just hearing other people's stories, it's almost like it's validating to you, because you hear something similar. And even though they didn't know the person that you knew, they knew some kind of archetype of a person that's very, very similar to the kind of character that you knew. Okay, Meredith, you talk of two key needs, safety and truth. Isn't there a third though, i.e. hope and faith that it will get better? Does it get better? Which hope and faith? Like the hope and faith that the person or the relationship will get better? Or you mean like the hope and faith that you will get better in your healing away from that person? I'm assuming that's what you're asking, right? Like the hope and faith that you're going to heal, you're going to move beyond it. That's not going to be the reality anymore. All of the PTSD isn't going to be the forever reality. There's a bunch of messages here. I'm assuming that's what you were talking about. Yeah, the hope and faith of healing. Okay, let me go back up here to the question. Okay. So isn't there a third, the hope and faith that it will get better? So, okay, well, technically, I guess the third would be, maybe we'll call it third and fourth, right? I think the two absolute most important foundations are the safety and truth. And I've read that in a lot of psychology material on PTSD recovery. They're mostly aiming it, towards veterans in combat PTSD, but I would say that applies too. Also, it's very important to take action to change things, right? Because if you don't take new action, nothing changes. If you learn everything that you learn but don't do anything with it, nothing really is going to change. You might feel better in your mind, but nothing is seemingly changing in your life. But then taking the action with the faith, right? So versus taking the action with the doubt, because it's either faith or doubt, and it's not both, right? And so coming out of the negativity paradigm, because everything in that relationship with the narcissist was negativity, whether it was fear or criticism or cruelty or doubt or pushing you down, or whatever it was all negative. Like, you're not good enough, you didn't do this good enough, you'll never be anything without me, blah blah blah, negative, negative, negative. So in order to overcome all those doubts, yes, there is an element of faith, and that is really important. The faith alone, though, again, doesn't do anything without the action together. The faith and the action have to go together. Without the faith, the action will probably end up just self-sabotaging, because it will still be caught in the doubt, right? So, if you're programmed with all these doubts, like you can't do it, you're not good enough, and then you work at it, and just as you're about to do it, you find that like something sabotages you, or you sabotage yourself. Like somehow it was like there was this like trip mechanism that went off. Like as soon as you got this close to making some big change, or to reaching some kind of next level of success or fulfillment or something like that, so you got really sick, or you came down with an injury, or you said something, you know what I mean? Something like this. So what I find is that the doubt leads to the sabotage, and it's usually self-sabotage. Usually, back then it was the abuser sabotaging you, but then they train you to abuse yourself. They train you to sabotage yourself with the doubts. The doubt is what will nullify everything. It's the kryptonite of human potential. Like, you could be going strong in your actions, and the doubt creeps in, and it's like flattened, right? It's like the house of cards falls down. So the faith has to be there. There has to be an element of faith. And the more you cultivate that faith, the more you're going to cancel out all those doubts. But at the same time, there also has to be an action with the faith, because the faith without action, it's like the knowledge without action, right? It's only potential power. Like, we are like co-creators with the universe. And the faith is that the universe is going to bring something, and it will. It definitely will. But then the action is you taking a step towards that, right? Because the universe can only bring it toward you. You still have to take a step towards it. You still have to take the action to make that happen. Like luck, right? I think it's more like the grace, the synchronicity of the universe, how the universe hands you something, but then still having to take the action. So yeah, all of that is together, right? There's so many things that will go, into the recovery process. I think the two most foundational, like, gotta put this at the foundation. If we don't have this basement foundation, nothing else, like no faith, no action, none of this is going to work until the truth and the safety is there. I think those are like the very, very, very foundational aspects. They have to be there in order to start building, in order to start moving forward with things. And yes, it gets better. It gets much better. Someone says, your poker face looks awesome, by the way. I wish I could do that too. Yeah, I don't always have that face. And I think people often tell me, like, they don't have to like know what I'm feeling. They can often see it on my face, right? I express emotion quite clearly on my face. So it took a lot of practice to do that. And I had to practice it in front of the mirror because I didn't know what it looked like. Like, I didn't realize, like, when my eyebrows was like way up here, I was like, obviously I'm questioning what you're saying. There's an obvious emotional response there. I didn't realize that. It was just a natural thing. So practice that in front of the mirror. I know it seems silly, right? But I really recommend doing that, because you'll really see like what it looks like. Practice even having a conversation. Practice, if you were to run into them, what would that look like? Because if you're afraid that you're going to run into them or something like that, or if you have to deal with this person in a gray rock sort of way to exchange children or something, practice that interaction in the mirror before you actually get out there. That way it's like, it becomes kinesthetic memory. It's like, you got that when you get there in person. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to work so hard, to keep flat, to keep, neutral. It's like, it becomes more, just more natural for you. Someone said privately, I could actually see mine watching my face for the reactions they were trying to provoke. Once you realize they're doing this, you can see that they're just bullies. Exactly. You may have heard me mention this guy that I was with. We were living together for a couple months when he basically just out of the blue told me that, he doesn't love me like I love him. He just doesn't get attached to people like other people, as if he were more enlightened rather than having an attachment disorder. And then literally he moved himself across the room so he could look at me. And then he told me how, if I were to die or disappear, how it wouldn't make a difference in his life. And it would just go on like normal. And it would probably take him 3 days to get a new routine, but then it would be like I never existed. And I could really see like he was watching for me. And so that's when like, I just knew, like, I didn't know about all this stuff, but I just knew in that moment not to give him that, not to give him a single tear, not to give him my anger, not to yell at him, not to reproach him, not to anything, but just stare at him as if it didn't even bother me, as if he were speaking some kind of fluff about something else or someone else, and just see, because that was his aim. Like, I realized in that moment, that's what he was aiming for. So when you realize that, then it gives you a lot of power. And then you realize, okay, so if that's what they want, then I'm not going to give them that. So what can I do to not give them that, right? And so that's, flat affect, no response, totally neutral, not letting them hit any buttons, and staring down the wolf. Someone asks, how do you not be opinionated and show no emotion in court for custody in front of your narcissist so they can't control you during a hearing? I do not want the judge to think I'm being harsh toward him, but I know he will try to manipulate me or break me down emotionally in front of a judge. It worries me to face him in court. So yeah, these are very challenging situations when you have to face them, especially in a court. And like, I don't have experience with child custody. I don't have a child. I definitely don't have a child with a narcissist. So like, I have no idea what that's like in the moment, but the experience I have with the narcissist, and knowing, okay, so here you have something even bigger than you. You have children, right? This is custody. So, you have a purpose bigger than you, which is the future of your children, the well-being of your children, so in a way you have something in your corner on your behalf, because that's going to fill you with a sense of purpose. I didn't have anyone else or something bigger. It was like me versus him sort of situation. So in this case, know that, you're doing this for your children, and it is of utter importance for you to maintain your center, to maintain grounded, to not let him trigger you and trip you into having some sort of emotional outburst that makes you appear unstable as their mother. Like, what you are doing is for the benefit of your children so that they can live a happy and healthy life and be as safe as possible from this. And if I were you, before you get to court, like, if you have an idea of what's going to come up in the custody hearing, or, maybe, if somehow they're going to be bringing up past situations, if I were you, then I would go in there written down with like, a list of things, like facts. So there's nothing emotional on this list. It's not, I feel such and such. It's, he did this, he did this thing on this date at this time. He said to my child this thing, he did this to my child, and I would just write out the facts. And that way, whatever comes up in the court, if it's like, okay, so there was this thing that happened, but you have it written down. So you're not relying on your memory, first of all, because you know how the memory works with abuse, right? Is you can forget things, or in the moment when you become so emotionally flustered, it's like you can't deliver like the most important part of what you need to say, and you say this stuff instead, and like it doesn't come out. When you have the facts there, it's all written down. You can rely on that instead of your memory. And then, if the judge is asking questions about things that have happened, you also don't get caught in like the emotional thing. You don't get caught in the self-defense. You just very clearly state the things that he did, the abusive things that he did, or how he treated your children, or, any kind of physical or psychological violence, verbal violence, you know, that he directed at you and the children. And it's just facts. So it's not emotions, it's just facts. Courts don't care about how you feel about things. Usually they just want to know facts of things. And, you know, so breathing being the first thing, right? Like, so before you give any response, breathe like 3 times. In like, your breath will bring you back to the present moment. It's going to be so important for you to maintain the mindfulness of the present moment, the here and now. That's where your power is. Because when he provokes you emotionally, he's trying to trigger you into the past and then getting into that dynamic and stuff. So you have to stay in the present moment. So breathe before you answer, and then answer as neutrally as possible without expressing a lot of emotion, but expressing the facts. Like, he did this thing, he did that thing, you know, and just be very clear about what's going on. That way it's not like you're attacking him. You know, the judge isn't, you were fearing that the judge would think you're being harsh toward him. This is not going to appear to be an attack. It's going to be an enumeration of the facts of his behavior. This is his behavior. So it's not even like you're attacking him as a character. You're simply saying, these are his behaviors. And this is the definition of abuse. And then leave it to the judge to work that out. But that way you're not being emotional about things. And whatever you do, don't get caught in the self-defense, because he's always going to try to get you to defend what you're doing, to get you to think or somehow get yourself caught in some kind of defending of yourself and what you did and why you did it. Don't do that. Don't get caught in that. That's a trap. Just state the facts, and the facts that all of these things are abusive behaviors, you know, and that's worrisome because you have children. You know, I don't know your personal situation, but this is the generality that I would use to apply. You know, go in there with the facts, have it written down. Don't rely on your memory. Keep yourself in the present moment with your breath. Breathe, and then just let him show his true colors. Like, sometimes, you know, it's so frustrating because they're just so freaking charming, you know, and then even like court people are charmed into that. But sometimes the judges are a little more keen on their awareness and perception than they let you notice. And sometimes like, they may be other narcissists too, like the judges. And sometimes they really get annoyed with narcissistic things that other narcissists do. And maybe the judge will call him out on those things, you know, if he just reveals himself. So don't let him trigger you into the emotional reaction, because that's what he wants. You know, his aim is for you to look like the bad guy, for you to look like the unstable parent. So don't give him what he wants. Someone says, this is an observation rather than a question. I watched a Ross Rosenberg video on codependency recovery. What struck me is that the steps to recovery seem to be so similar to the steps for narcissistic abuse. Narc abuse recovery, I mean. Right. So, you know, I think Ross is probably mostly talking about the codependency recovery of having been in a relationship with what he calls an emotional manipulator. If you read his book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, he doesn't call it narcissistic abuse. And he doesn't refer to these people as cluster Bs or narcissists or borderlines or sociopaths. He uses the term emotional manipulator. And that makes it really, you know, this label makes it really clear that the person is manipulative, but without getting caught up in labels, you know. And then these are the results on the person, or this is the kind of pattern in a person that, you know, generally presents itself, you know, in a person who pre-qualifies for that kind of a relationship. And so the codependency being the person who, you know, the two main things that I got out of his book were the lack of boundaries, you know, not understanding that you have the right to have boundaries, feeling guilt and shame for expressing your boundaries, going back on your boundaries and allowing the other person to manipulate that, or never, you know, setting them to begin with, that sort of thing. And then also the expression of self. You know, he talks about how the codependent also has, you know, an enormous difficulty to express who they are, you know, maybe because growing up, you were taught that you weren't allowed to be this way or that way, or you weren't good enough, or you weren't intelligent enough, or you weren't attractive enough, or you weren't whatever enough. And so, you know, you have this difficulty in expressing who you are, as well as like your needs and your wants. And so that presents itself in a relationship where like your emotional needs are not being met at all, but you're constantly being held at blackmail to meet the emotional needs of this person. And then as soon as you express your need, you're told that you're oversensitive or selfish, or it's unfair for you to think about yourself, or whatever it is, right? And you catch yourself in that dynamic. So those being, the two main issues that he talks about in that book, about the issues with the codependent, and how needing to work on the boundaries and needing to work on the expression of self, so that you no longer get into these relationships with manipulators. And also that helps you heal from that abuse, because the more clear you are with yourself, as I was mentioning earlier, the more you're going to be able to recognize other people, and the less it's going to matter to you what other people are trying to tell you who you are. They don't know you. When you know you, you're not second guessing yourself. When someone comes at you and they're like, oh no, I know you, you're like this. And you're like, no, that's not me. But if you're not in that state of confidence in who you are and knowing yourself, you might be like, well, is it me? Maybe it's me. Maybe they're right. And so then you get caught in that trap. And so this word, codependent, codependency, in the recovery, in the psychology field, it used to mostly refer to like the mate or the partner, the enabler of the addict or the alcoholic. And nowadays it's also being applied to, the partner or the target or victim of one of these manipulative types, because the codependent is enabling it. Ross talks about it as a dance. You're still dancing, right? If you're still in it, and it's not your fault. You're not responsible for the abuse, but how the power you have in that situation is, do you want to keep playing that game? Do you want to keep dancing, or do you want to get off the field? And getting off the field is no longer buying into the rationalizations and the excuses that this person is using to justify their abusive behaviors or their manipulative behaviors. So that's a really great book if you haven't read it. And yeah, Ross has other really great videos too on recovering, from that state of mind that possibly got you into one of those relationships to begin with. So yeah, they are very similar. Someone says, I hear isolation mentioned a little bit here tonight. I am in an isolation phase, seeing family and friends as little as I can, feeling a little fearful of any new people now knowing about the codependent narcissist attraction, and some doubt and untrusting thoughts about some friends. I guess boundaries really help here, but anything else maybe? So, this phase of, you're calling it isolation. I might call it like, spending some time alone, some quality alone time, getting to know yourself and who you really are, because you probably lost like total sense of who you were in that relationship. Like maybe it wasn't really clear to you who you were to begin with, but then like you really got confused and everything after that relationship. And then, once you realize what narcissism is, or what, emotional manipulation is, and then you start to realize like, not only was it that person, but it was other people in your life. And then you start cutting those people out. And then it starts to feel like, wow, there's like very few people actually in your life, at least healthy people, and so you can get into this phase of spending some time alone, which can be healthy, and also getting rid of the toxic people in your life, which is also very healthy. And, in being cautious about who you're meeting. You mentioned being a little fearful about new people. And so, the more you spend time getting to know yourself and like who you really are and what's really important to you and that sort of thing, then you won't feel as fearful when you meet new people. Because when you're meeting with this person, and they're making you feel a certain way, like they're trying to make you feel a certain way about something that you are, or something that you believe, or something that you do. And you got to check in with yourself and be like, do I believe that? No, I don't believe that. Nope, that's actually not a fair assessment of me. And this person is trying to tell me who I am, and they're trying to use that as a manipulation tactic. No, thank you. So you walk away before you even get in deep with that person. It's like the more you know yourself, the clearer it's going to be that, when the toxic person shows up, when those toxic patterns show up, you can be like, no, thank you. That's not it for me. So there is a healthy part of the spending some alone time, getting to know yourself and who you are and what's important to you and what you love, and doing those things that you love that might be just for you. It might just bring you joy, and for no other reason than that it brings you joy, and that's healthy. That's important, because you just spent all that time being with someone who tried to kill your joy, who probably succeeded in killing all the things that brought you joy in your life. And so now you need to get back in contact with that. And then also building your support network so that you don't feel totally alone out there. It may not be that you know people in your immediate physical environment. It might be people that you meet online that you have some interactions with. And it's like, okay, every time you need that reality check, you go there and you're like, okay, that's right. That's who that, yeah, okay, got it. Maybe you need that kind of thing. And then hopefully you start to get, an understanding of who are the supportive, loving, uplifting, healthy people in your life. And then you have more energy, to spend with them, to invest with them. And then maybe generally, you start attracting more new people who have more positive qualities, who are more healthy people, who are not those same old patterns. Because as you're changing yourself, you're also shifting what's coming into your life. There will always, I think, be those tests, that come across the radar, just to keep you on your toes, to see where you're at, to see how you really believe, or even as like a law of verification, like right after you work something out, it's like that same test will show up almost immediately. It might be like the phone rings immediately, or like immediately you meet some other person who tests you in that same way. And that's your opportunity to put into practice what you're learning. But yeah, the boundaries too, that's really healthy. It's the boundaries and the expression of self, knowing who you are and feeling free to express that, and not feeling guilt about having needs, and not feeling guilt about or shame about who you are, or having this boundary, or liking this certain thing. When you start to feel that kind of freedom, that's where like you're really reaching some higher levels of your self-healing. You're getting more confident in who you are. You're feeling your self-worth is coming up. Your self-esteem is coming up. When you have that first interaction with someone, after you're doing this work, and it's like they're trying to tell you who you are, and you're like, no. And you don't even have the doubt anymore, and you don't have the guilt trip, and you don't have the shame. That's when like you're really lifting your self-worth. You're really lifting your self-esteem, because that person is not shaking you. They're not planting that doubt. They're not getting you to doubt yourself, to doubt your perception of yourself or who you are in the world. Okay, so a person from earlier writes privately, I actually don't have things from him and don't look at his photos or Facebook. It are more thoughts about him, is thinking about him and what happened breaking no contact. It is in a way, because, so you're going to have the flashbacks. And that, at the beginning, I was talking about how to deal with that. But when you catch yourself just sitting there ruminating, that's when you got to redirect your mind to something else, something that brings you joy, something that you love, something that's fun. But to stop yourself from those patterns of just obsessing and thinking and ruminating about that person, because it's like you're sending energy in their direction. And I know that sounds kind of woo-woo, but I really believe in that. Like, people who are more sensitive to that sort of stuff, they will tap into that. They will feel it in some way, so it's best just not to think about them. When you catch yourself doing that, redirect, whatever that thing is. Like, maybe, like you want to learn about a new thing, or maybe there's some new instrument, that you're enjoying, or maybe you just want to go out and listen to some kind of music, or you want to go to the park and hike, whatever it is. But find something to redirect your mind to, something healthy, something positive, something that's stimulating your healing or your creativity or your well-being, but keeping it away from him. And so, your default is going to automatically be going there at first, especially, I think maybe you were the person who was pretty early 1 week into the recovery. So the default mechanism is going to keep going to that. And so the more you practice redirecting your mind to something else, the more your energy is going to go there. You're going to start to build something else. But like, where your attention goes is where your energy goes, right? And so if your attention is all like thinking about him, imagining things, rehashing things, like all of your energy is going to that. It's not going to you. It's not going to your healing. It's not going to something beautiful and positive in your life. It's not going to something that brings you joy. It's going to something that brings you pain, So that's where the discipline comes in, the mental discipline of redirecting. It's not easy, but you can do it. And it gets easier and easier and easier. At the beginning, it's just very overwhelming. It's going to seem like all day long, you're constantly playing this game of redirecting. So if you can set up things that you do, like, okay, if my mind goes there, I automatically will now do this thing, whatever that positive, healthy, creative, fun thing is for you. So set it up, decide what that is, or decide maybe you have a list of things, and maybe you even need to write them down so that when you catch yourself going there again, you go to that list and you're like, okay, I can do any of these things and not that. One of these things, pick one, okay, I'm going to do this right now. And I'm going to get my mind off of that, but constantly redirecting your mind to something else. Someone says, sometimes it's hard to accept who the narcs are because everyone else is so naive. The narcs are two-faced. People say their middle name is hypocrite, and everyone else only sees the good face. I don't even talk about their other face, and I'm still told that my behavior towards the narc is wrong, and I should be more caring and affectionate. I was told I am too cold, and the poor narc suffers because of my behavior. And these people who tell me how I should be were taught this by other narcs. They were told I am wrong because of X and Y, and I should be more B and C. They are not narcs, but unlearned the ability to listen they once had. Will they ever learn their narcs' opinions are not the only possible opinions to have? Will they ever see their narcs' opinions are actually nothing more than prejudices? A person who was talking about eating disorders, a very helpful book, Inside Out, by Anastasia Amour, and Melissa Fabello's articles on body positivity. Okay, so to address the questions here. So these people who are saying they're not narcissists, but they have, it sounds like fleas. You heard this expression, narcissist fleas, like when you hang out with narcissists, you're going to catch fleas. Like if you sleep with a dog, you're going to catch fleas, right? So when you hang out around narcissists, you're going to pick up some of their bad behaviors. Maybe they were conditioned, to capitulate, to please, to comply with the narcissist. And maybe they even learned that that was the easy button, that it was easier to do that, because it created a short-term, immediate kind of calming down of things. But the reality is that that only leads to long-term problems. They're sacrificing long-term peace for peace in the moment. And peace in the moment by capitulating, by giving in, by pleasing them, by doing what they want, that's only going to lead to long-term problems. It's going to lead to long-term issues with your self-esteem, with your self-doubt. You're going to be in the same thing over and over again because you're giving them what they want, And so if they can't see that, then those are probably not healthy people for you to hang out with. Like you can probably just consider those people flying monkeys. They don't have to be narcissists to be flying monkeys. Plenty of codependents, will sign on for that role because they're just hooked in to the narcissist paradigm. They're supporting that. They're getting something out of it. Don't get me wrong. They're getting something out of that, whether it's simply that they get to feel like they're a good person because they're continually forgiving people who trespass against them and see how they're just like their savior. And, it could be that sort of thing, or it could be that they're like actually getting something from the narcissist, like finances or like some sort of like emotional approval or validation or status at work or status in society. Like they could be getting something, out of that, and which is why they're dependent on that. Or it just could be with what internally they're telling themselves about who they are if they put up with that, or if they do those things, or maybe they just think it's the easiest way to deal with it in the moment, but that's never going to lead to long-term peace because they're just going to keep doing those same manipulative behaviors when they realize they can get away with it. So, will they ever learn? Will they ever see? Your questions here? I don't know. I can't tell you that. That depends on those people. All I can tell you is that those are not healthy people to be hanging out with right now. Like until they realize, until they change things for themselves and start living in healthier patterns, it's not going to be healthy for you. We talked about truth and safety being at like the core foundation to start building the healing, right? They're not being truthful with themselves. They're not bringing truth into your life. They're just confusing you with that kind of stuff. And that's not safe. Like that's not emotionally safe for you to keep hearing and being exposed to this, because it's going to cause doubt. Like even if you're really, really sure that you're making the right decision to go no contact, to not, whatever, give in to this person, at some level, that's going to start to confuse you. Those doubts, the seeds that they're planting, they're going to start to sprout. It's going to start to create weeds in your garden. So, it's really just better not to have contact with people like that because they're going to confuse you. If you want to stay clear about yourself, stay away from people like that. Again, it doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they're unhealthy. They're using toxic patterns. They may or may not be narcissists. Just because they're not a narcissist doesn't mean that they're healthy. Doesn't mean that they have healthy patterns. Okay, private message. Do the flying monkeys ever see them without their mask? I think I'm still craving some sort of validation, right? I think we all crave that sort of validation, and it's so hard to give up on that. Like so hard to give up on getting that validation from the abuser or from the flying monkeys. And really the reality is that you just have to cut it off and go away and step away from that and know that they're going to say whatever they say. They're going to believe whatever they believe. They're going to talk shit about you, however they're going to talk shit about you. But that doesn't really matter, because that's not your life. That's them. That's what they're into. That's your reality. That doesn't have to be your reality. And it's only exasperating when you're trying to change their mind. Right. So that's the controlling aspect of codependency, where you want to change their mind in order to vindicate yourself. And it's natural to feel that way because the person is saying false things about you. You want to vindicate yourself. You want to tell the truth. But when you try to tell your truth to someone who doesn't want to hear your truth, it's just going to lead you to feeling like you're losing your sanity. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to know. If they wanted to know, they would know. They would seek it out. They would do something different. They would not be playing the role of the flying monkey. But they're there. They're getting something out of it. They're getting something out of it. And you can't change that. So as soon as you accept that you have no control over that, and the only control you have is whether or not you engage with that, that's when you take back your power. When you realize it is a huge waste of power to engage in that. And that you can't change their minds. You can't get them to realize. You can show them the truth all you want. And if they don't want to see it, it's just a huge waste of your time. And then you're going to start to feel like you're doubting yourself. So it's better just to validate yourself. Go talk to some other survivors who went through something similar. Different situation, different people, but they went through something similar. They get it. They know the feelings you have right now. Even though it was something different in the situation, they know the feelings that you have and they get it. And just understand that you're not alone in that. And that's how the smear campaign works. And that's how the flying monkeys work. It was set up that way. And the only power you have is just to cut that off. Someone says, knowing who I am helped me get through identifying NPD, BPD, sociopath, narcissistic profile. I have courage I did not know I had, me to walk away and stay safe. Okay, awesome. So knowing who you were, having that sense of self, right? Recognizing who you are is what helped you to get through that, to recognize who the other person is. Because when you knew who you were, it was really clear that it wasn't your fault, that this was something set up, that this was a character disturbance. You were able to identify the characters that you knew. And then you had the courage that you didn't even know you had to walk away, right? Because that's what keeps people there, is when the abuser tells you, you're not good enough. No one else will ever love you. No one else will ever hire you. No one else will ever whatever you. And then you believe that. And then you stay there because you don't really know yourself. But if you know yourself and you're like, no, I'm very lovable. There's plenty of people who already love me, and surely there will be others who love me. So it's not that you clearly don't know me. It just becomes easier for you to recognize those things. So good job to you for recognizing that, for knowing who you are, being able to see that, and then tapping into that courage to walk away. Someone says here, when the abusers are your parents, do you go no contact with your entire family, i.e. siblings, nieces, nephew, extended relatives? So this depends on you, and where you're at with your particular family. Sometimes it gets to the point where a person has to go no contact. I've known people whose parents stole their identity, took the social security number of their child, ran up credit on their child's social security number, this sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely. No contact. You can't be in contact with someone like that, right? Or say you have kids and your parents, or one of your parents is already, you're trying to end the legacy of abuse and keep your kids safe. And you notice that when your parent is around your kid, they're passing it on. They're teaching your kids those same patterns, those same toxic patterns. They've already picked a golden child and they've picked a scapegoat of your kids, and they're passing it on, and you're noticing anxiety in your kids. Whoa, right? got to cut that off. Like, that's not healthy, because that parent is just going to pass that down, and all the hard work that you're doing to try to get yourself healthy and get yourself well and keep your kids outside of that dynamic and do the best that you can do, you know, to keep them safe and healthy and foster their happiness and fulfillment in life, you know, that parent's going to sabotage it. And in that case, no, right? Maybe in your case, your parents live thousands of miles away and you don't have to see them very often, and you have, you know, an occasional surface conversation now and then, and that works for you, and you still have relationships with other people in your family who aren't toxic, you know, but they're also in relationship with their parents. Maybe that works in your case, you know, maybe it's not really, really bad, but if it gets to the point where you're trying to have a relationship with these people, but they're in a relationship with your parent, and then behind your back, your parent is talking bad about you, or, you know, saying something over here, and then instigating triangulation problems. Like, if that just gets really ugly, then you're probably going to have to go no contact, you know? And then if these people are still in contact and still supporting this person, you know, or relaying information back and forth, then these people are not healthy and safe to be around. So it really depends on your personal situation, you know, and what is manageable. You know, are you able to have, do you need to have no contact, or are you able to have some form of gray rock communication with very clear, very strong boundaries, with minimum contact, with no real talking about personal stuff? You know, part of the importance of the boundaries is what you're sharing and not sharing, you know, not oversharing, not sharing your personal stuff, not sharing your emotional stuff, not sharing your happiness, not sharing your sadness, because either way, you're going to take advantage of that, right? So if you can manage the gray rock boundaries and that feels safer and healthier for you, then that's fine. But if it's to the point where, like, this is really destructive on your life, then you got to figure that out inside and recognize that, and recognize when it's time to draw that line and make the cut, you know, and have no more contact, and possibly cut out other people in your family who are still involved in supporting that person, because essentially they become flying monkeys, you know? So it really depends on you and your situation. It's different in every situation, in every family. I'm really sorry. And these are like the hardest ones, I think. You know, I don't have a child. I can only imagine that would be a similar kind of situation, where if you have a child with a narcissist and having to deal with that is probably kind of similar to the kind of guilt that you would have with the parent. And I feel like, you know, the guilt that I have with the parent and cutting that off, you know, is significantly stronger than, like, say, the guilt of an ex or something like that, because that's the person who brought you into the world. That's the person who, you know, brought you up all your life. And it's like, there's like this already programmed guilt that, like, you owe them based on that. But if that person is to the point where, you know, they're becoming toxic to your health, like physically, psychologically, and the new boundaries aren't working, and they're not respecting the new boundaries, and, you know, the minimal contact is not working, then at that point you need to step it up. You know, you need to protect yourself with that no contact boundary, but it has to come from you, from what you know is true, you know, and don't let your other family members bully you otherwise. Like, when you understand, you know, this isn't working and the boundaries aren't working because they have no respect for boundaries. And if you get to that point where you have to have no contact, and other people are trying, you know, to convince you that, you know, you're punishing your parent or you're an ungrateful child, if they just don't get the situation, then you probably shouldn't have contact with those people either, because they're just going to confuse you. Okay. So, private message. The last conversation I had with the narc who told me to kill myself was a really hateful conversation on both sides. And then I went no contact. I was so provoked and said things I can't believe I said. And I hate that our relationship ended with that ugly conversation. Do you think I should send one last message to have a nice goodbye so he doesn't have hatred for me? Because I do worry that he is vengeful, because he's really disordered. Okay. So here's the thing, like, your final message to have a nice goodbye, there's never a nice goodbye, a nice closure with one of these types. It never happens. And he probably hates you, not because of that conversation, but he might hate something like how free you are as a human being, or, you know, how confident you are in some aspect of your life, or how talented you are at something, or, you know, some level of success that you have at something. Like, you having that conversation is not going to disengage his hatred for you. I do understand the regrets of having been provoked and said things you didn't mean, that were really out of character, and that you can't believe you said. I've gotten myself in that situation too, or even having done things that you really regretted, you know. And the reality is that you just need to get clear with yourself. Like, that's not you. That's not who you really are. When you're in contact with your constants, like the supportive people in your life, the people who are really close to you, you're not like that. You don't have that interaction. You never say and do things like that with them. You were out of character because of the dynamics of the abuse in that relationship. And forgive yourself for the words you said, for the actions you took that were out of your integrity, right? Because that's really what that is. It's like the integrity of that is bothering you. The fact that you felt like you were out of integrity. You're not going to be able to change anything with him. I did this exact same thing that you're talking about, the last covert narcissist, the very last conversation. I was so angry, texted things I regretted or whatever. And then, you know, like a month later, I emailed him and said, you know, I'm really sorry that it ended that way, and that I said these things. And, you know, I just wanted to let you know that, you know, I drank a bunch of ayahuasca and I saw things really clearly now, and just want to let you know that I forgive you for what you did, and blah, blah, blah. And that didn't go well at all. Like, he didn't acknowledge anything that he did. It wasn't like that he changed his behavior in any way. And it just gave him an in. Like, we had been no contact, although I didn't know that phrase at the time, but I had cut him off and he wasn't reaching out. We had no contact during that month. And then he got back in contact. So then it was like he understood that the door was open again. And so then, you know, every couple months he would like want to know what was going on, or, you know, my life. And it was always under this guise of just wanting to know how I was doing, but never saying anything about himself, kind of thing. And so I finally cut it off again. But I realized like it was hooking me back into that thing, and to realize like he didn't give a crap about me. Like, he just wanted to keep tabs on me, but he didn't really care about me. And, you know, chances are that conversation, if you try to have it, is just going to open things more. Like, it's going to put you back in the trauma bonding, you know, rewriting things that happened in the past, and, or possibly opening it to more, you know, communication. Like, it's probably just better if you get good with yourself on that. If you get right with yourself on that, get clear with yourself, forgive yourself, understand where you were out of integrity, you know, which words that you said and which actions you took that were out of integrity, and vow not to do that anymore, you know, and vow that from now on, you're not going to allow someone to disturb you to that point, to provoke you to that point where you behave out of character, because it's not you and that's not the person you want to be. And, you know, in that you're not just going to keep beating yourself up for what happened. You recognize how it got to that point. It didn't just come out of nowhere. You didn't just suddenly say those things. This person was pushing and pushing and pushing to get that reaction from you. So now, you know, the best thing is just to walk away, like not to react to that, not to give him anything, not to defend, not to have any explanation, just to walk away. And it's probably the best thing to do at this point. You know, it's certainly, if your goal in doing that is, you know, so that he doesn't have to have hatred for you, I'm sorry, but that's probably not going to change anything. Like, he probably hates you to begin with, you know. That's probably why they do the things that they do, you know, because they have this love-hate thing, and they go back and forth. They love some things about you and they idealize that, and then they hate those same things about you and they devalue that. And it's a very sick mind game, you know, and unfortunately there's like nothing you can say or do that's going to change that for that person. Someone says here, the isolation phase makes me get to know myself better. I'm questioning behaviors of my friends too, in the past and present, and look for clues if they have end traits or something else. I try not to tell them things that are difficult for me or make me vulnerable to protect myself. And I monitor how I feel around them doing that. It feels better, but also a bit lonely too. Okay, good job. You're doing good work. This is the really hard work, right? In the aftermath, when you're realizing like, oh shit, I'm surrounded by these people, right? And it's time to do a serious inventory of the people in your life and get the wrong people out of your life so you can create this space for the right people to enter. Because if all of your attention and energy is invested in these people, and these are all toxic dynamics, then you're not going to recognize a healthy person when they come by, because you're like, well, I already invested all this time over here, and here's this new person. And then, number one. And number two, you may not even recognize that this is like a healthy person and a positive, friendship person, somehow something in your life, because all this mess is in here. So when you get all that stuff out, you start having so much more energy and clarity as you set those boundaries, and you recognize, like, even though you're alone and more alone for a period of time, it's worth it, because you're getting the wrong people out of your life. It is so much better to be alone than in bad company. Like, the worst kind of loneliness is when you're hanging out with people and you feel more alone than when you feel when you're actually alone, right? If you find yourself in that social situation where you're looking around and you're like, I don't really have anything in common with them. Like, maybe we have this one thing in common. Like, I've heard people say, like, they joined parent groups and their mother groups or something, and when they looked around, they realized, like, the only thing they had in common was the fact that they all procreated. Like, that's nothing real. Like, it's not like a deep core value, right? And so, like, do you have similar values, deep core values with these people? No. If not, they're probably not the right people to have close to you in your life. Like, you want to be around people who have similar values. Like, they look at respect in a similar way, and so they treat you with the kind of respect that you would treat them with, and that sort of thing. And hang out only with people who have those similar values. Otherwise, you're just going to feel bad about yourself. And the good thing about spending the time alone is getting to know you, and then also, like, taking a break and a distance from all that. Then it becomes really clear when you see that again. You're like, oh, wow, that's funny. That's just like the same toxic thing that this other person did. Oh, now I see they're doing the same thing, and you recognize that this person is very much like this person from your past, and you shouldn't have them in your life, and like, it just becomes a lot clearer. And there will be this uncomfortable part when you're more alone than you were before, but recognize the fact that you're taking steps in the right direction. Like, you're getting the wrong people out, so you can create the space to take care of yourself, to get clear about who you are, what you value, what you love. And then you have this open space in your life with energy, and your sense of self, that now you can welcome new people into your life if people show up with healthy patterns, and the kind of similar values that you share and how you see life. Okay, to the person with the court situation, you're welcome. I'm sorry, I don't have personal experience with that. I'm only giving you from the best that I can come up with from dealing one-on-one with these types, So yeah, those coping mechanisms that I gave you, that's the best that I've got for dealing, with these people in court. I understand there's a whole other added layer to that I don't totally get, because I'm not a parent. But I'm glad that was helpful, and I wish you the best of luck. I'm sending you a big hug, because I know that's got to be really difficult. One thing I didn't mention, but I did mention to someone else who asked a similar question, the binaural beats. And I keep saying this all the time. I'm sorry for repeating myself, but some people just haven't heard me say it. Binaural beats, or solfeggio frequencies. You can get an app on your phone called Brainwave, and you can listen to these, and it's very calming. So, like, when you get into that panic and anxiety state, you can listen to this as you're walking into court, the whole morning. And then, like, as you're walking into court, and then you put your thing away so it doesn't look disrespectful, to the judge or anyone. But listening to this, it was just calm your brain down from that chaotic, erratic state to just much more calm. I would go with, like, the theta frequency, maybe even delta. Like, if you're just really, really panicking, go for, like, a delta, because that's just really deep and grounding and put you into, like, a deep state of meditation. And then, walking into court, hopefully you'll feel a lot clearer. Okay. Yeah. They can be very charming and are very good manipulators and con artists. Okay. Private question. I broke no contact, and then I visualized cutting the cord. Somehow he's on my mind after doing it. I thought a lot about his cheating, porn addiction, etc. Also that he's playing victim. He's using my outbursts during the relationship and the times I accused him of cheating on me, even though the proof and the way he treated me spoke volumes. But he still plays the victim now. He knows that he pressed all my buttons and brought all my insecurities to the surface. He's totally delusional and interested in what strangers think of him. Okay, so breaking the no contact, okay, then you cut the cords, and then right after, he's on your mind. So what that's probably telling you is that before you cut the cords, you were probably thinking about him a lot more than you realized. And so now that the cord is cut, it's like you're looking for that. You're looking for that connection again, because that connection was just always on. There was always energy going back and forth between you until you cut the cords. So it may be that you've now created more cords. It's like when we think so much about a person, it's like it's like a fishing line. Like we send these cords back out to them and it can reattach, some level, maybe they tune into that. So I would recommend doing the cord cutting exercises again to cut that off. But maybe even before you do that, to really look at what you were getting out of that, like what you were getting out of still thinking about him. Because it's not entirely no contact. Like if you're still obsessing about him and thinking about him, then it's like a lot of your energy is going towards him, right? So you're looking for that. Like some part of you still wants that. Maybe it feels familiar, even though it feels toxic and painful, and it reminds you of the past. And then of course, he's out there doing what he's doing and playing the victim and, in playing on the fact that he provoked you to do things that you didn't want to do, and you had outbursts because he was pushing and provoking you. So practice the self-forgiveness on that too. Recognize that, as I was talking to the other person earlier who mentioned something similar about being provoked, and saying things that she regretted later. So many of us have gotten into this situation. So, get real with yourself and get honest and recognize that you did that, and you own your behavior and your actions, and recognize that you don't want to keep giving him that. Like you don't want to keep giving him your energy. You don't want to keep giving him your attention. And by simply thinking and obsessing about him, you're sending him your energy and your attention. So, get clear on that. And then, ask yourself, like, is there some benefit you're getting from that? And maybe that's the thing that you don't want to see. Maybe you're like, well, yeah, it kind of feels good when I could be like, this jerk really screwed me over and he did all this and he's such a jerk, and it's like, but if you're getting something out of that, that's keeping you in the blame dynamic, which is keeping you in the victim mode. Know what I mean? So you probably don't really want to be there, so you need to break that role, to break that connection, to stop whatever it is that you're getting from that, so that that's no longer serving you. And that what's serving you is actually your empowerment, which is, I don't want to go there anymore. I don't want to think about him. I don't want to think about the stuff that he did. Like that's over, that's done. He is not the person for me. He is deluded out there telling all these people all this stuff. And if they believe them, that's on them, not on me. I can't control that. I can't control him. I can't control how people perceive him. I can't control the smear campaign. All I can control is me and myself. And that's really where I need to invest my energy and my attention, and then cut those cords, and then see what happens, and then be vigilant with yourself. And every time you catch yourself ruminating and obsessing, like I was telling that other person earlier, find something to redirect your mind to. Something that brings you joy. It was like your puppy or something like this. It's something that brings you joy. Maybe it's some new instrument that you're learning, whatever it is, but redirect, maybe something you want to learn. It's like really going to engage your mind because you got to study and research, and like hours went by and you're like, oh my God, hours went by and I didn't even eat and I forgot all about him because I was so focused on this thing. Awesome. Right? But find new things to invest your time, your energy, and your awareness on, instead of keep focusing on him, because it is still creating that connection with him. Okay, someone says, I've noticed there are some narc recovery groups on the website called Meetup. Haven't been to any, but may be good. A fair few of these in US. That's awesome. I'm not real familiar with Meetup. I do know a little bit, about the setup, how they have groups and people will meet in person based on particular interests that they have. Maybe they like to hike together, or maybe in this case, it's like narcissistic abuse recovery, that sort of thing. That's awesome. If you find a good support group. Again, one, word of caution is just be careful that there aren't any sharks there, because if you were a narcissist and you saw that and you were looking for a victim and you're like, wow, a whole room of victims, or Just be careful. I'm not saying that there are definitely narcissists there. What I'm saying is just be cautious as you approach that. Just as you would be cautious if you approach like a spiritual group, knowing that any of the leaders could be a narcissist, you know, or any of the followers could be a narcissist. Like, so don't be wide open just because it says narcissistic abuse recovery, right? So walk in there with some boundaries, walk in there with awareness, and be cautious, you know, and really feel like, how do you feel when you're listening to people, when you're interacting with people, when you're talking to people, and ease in, you know, instead of like revealing everything about yourself in the very beginning, just in case, you know, somebody's antenna goes up and they're like, oh, I know you, I got your number, I know how to move in on you now, right? But that's awesome though, that there are more groups of these popping up. You know, even in the online groups, you still need to be cautious, right? Like there's still, it's a great place to meet plenty of other survivors. And it's also a place where, you know, like this other person was mentioning this ex of hers, you know, pretending to be the victim, you know, now he's showing up in these groups, you know, pretending to be the victim, you know, so be careful because these people can show up anywhere. Right. So, it's an amazing opportunity to connect with other survivors and in a support network, but also use your discernment, you know, this developing sense of discernment that you're working on to figure out, how do I feel around this person? Does this feel good? Does this not feel good? You know, how am I? And keep checking in with yourself and check in with that feeling. If you're not feeling good, you're feeling really uncomfortable or really icky or really, something is just not right, that's a sign, right? And so listen to that, and listen to that first and foremost, more than what anyone else is telling you. Someone says, I was deemed incompetent by the state, recently vindicated though. Was that a child custody? I'm sorry, I don't remember what that was in relation to. Someone else said they're excellent doing it every night. I'm not sure what that was in relationship to either. I'm sorry. I'm catching up on these. I think they probably came in like in real time to something that was going on and I didn't see it in time. Someone asked, speaking of shared values, do you suppose that there is a stage in recovery that people contribute to the recovery of others through what they have learned? Yes. And that's when you go to the next level, right? Because if you think about it, right, like the idea of learning and teaching, right? Like they say, like when you can teach something, that's when you know you really know it, right? And that's when like you reach a new layer of your own understanding, is when you teach it to someone else. And so, you know, in the recovery period, as you support other people, it's like you reach new levels of your own healing because of that, you know, because you're able to help other people, because you're able to contribute to something bigger than yourself, because you're able to use it instead of it using you. You know, you're transmuting the trauma into a gift, into something that you're sharing with other people, into something that's going to something bigger than you. You know, it's not even just about you. So yeah, that is an amazing part of the healing journey. Okay, so in regards to something earlier, this person was saying, I'm not getting anything out of obsessing over it, but I can't get it out of my mind. Right. So the obsession is possibly then, you know, you're just trying to understand, right? Because like sometimes we just obsess about things like we're just trying to get it. Like, what does that even mean? How did that happen? How did I fall for that? You know, and those sorts of things. So, you know, if you can resolve what that is, if you can get a sense of what that is, like what's left unresolved, what don't you get yet? You know, do you get that this person is a manipulative con artist, that it was set up like that from the beginning, you know, and that's how they are with everybody and not just you, you know, I mean, with everybody that they target, right, for the abuse, not for the mass amount of people who don't really know them, but who worship them for the image that they see, but don't really know the person, but who they are in those close relationships with their target. You know, have you really accepted who they are? Have you really accepted, you know, that was abuse? Have you really accepted now that your empowerment moving forward is to understand who you are so that you don't fall back into that? You know, is to understand what the red flags are so that you don't go into that again, so you know what they are. You know, is it about resolving the fact that you were deceived? You know, that you could, maybe that's part of it, because sometimes the ego because the ego wants to be right and the ego wants to win. And even if you were the legitimate victim in the situation, like your ego still wants to be right and it still wants to win. So your ego is going to be arguing the fact that you're the victim and this person hurt you and it's so wrong, right? It's like, if this is the thing that's coming up, then you need to address that, so that you're no longer feeling that you're in the blame and the victimhood, but that you're empowering yourself in some way. Like, okay, I'm doing this action now so that I'm more clear about who I am. I'm taking this action now so I can recognize it in other people. I am taking this action so that, and so you start to like building this positive affirmation, not some foreign idea that's not even real to you, that your subconscious doesn't believe in, but some real action that you're actually taking, moving you in the direction that you actually want to be versus stuck obsessing. You know what I mean? So get in there deep and find out, what is it? Like, what's the hook for you? What are you still trying to resolve? Like, what haven't you accepted yet? It's possibly something you haven't accepted yet. Is it something that you're trying to control? Like, are you trying to control his perception of you? Are you trying to control other people's perception of him? All that's out of your control. All you can control is you. Get in there and find out what that is, so that then you can start redirecting your mind towards other things. Someone says, my N was in a single parent group, so it is always good to be aware. He was probably looking for supply there. Yeah, gross. They often hone in on support groups. Like, I've heard of many people talking about 12-step programs where the leaders are narcissists, or, many other people that show up there are narcissists or sociopaths or something, and they're looking for their next victims, for their next targets. So always be aware. Anywhere you go, a church, a spiritual group, those are prime places for these people to hang out with, Why? Well, because the support network, people are vulnerable and they're going there to get help and they've been through this traumatic experience. Spiritual and religious areas, because they know that they want someone who's like ultra forgiving, turns the other cheek, compassionate, loving, investing, right? So yeah, why not look for someone who, lives by Christian values or some other religious values or by these spiritual values, you know what I mean? So be very cautious when going into those environments, because they could be anywhere, and especially fishing in those kinds of environments. Okay. Binaural beats. I totally get all of it now. Okay. Binaural beats are amazing. They'll help you. Someone says his last email was total projection to me, absolutely vile email, but I just smiled. I really totally get it. Okay, good. Good. Yeah, don't fall into that trap of wanting to like respond to that. You can't change that. Like, there's nothing you can say to rationalize with that, because that's just not rational, what he's doing. Someone says, I feel there is a fine line between obsessing about what happened and educating yourself to understand it all. Right. So that's a positive way. I'm glad you brought this up. That is one positive way to redirect yourself, right? So instead of sitting there, obsessing would be, you're sitting there and you're just like thinking about all the things that happened and all the things they did and like all the memories, and you're just like over and over, right? Versus directing your energy to the internet or books or, whatever, and you're learning about things, right? And you're making sense of things. And it's like, okay, now I'm understanding what's happening, right? So like all those things that were unresolved, they're starting to resolve themselves. So you've channeled that into a positive way. You've redirected all the energy you would have spent in that negative downward spiral feedback loop where you're just ruminating and obsessing. Like nothing good was going to come of that, right? But where you took that energy and that focus and you put it towards learning, right? Like Jackson McKenzie talks about in his book, Psychopath Free, that's the first step, is the education and the awareness. Like that is why most people end up, right, once they realize what's going on and they get the keyword or a keyword, then it's like they're just like digesting massive amounts of like YouTube videos and online information and everything. I did that. I think that's a normal phase of it. It's like you just got to understand it, right? But then at a certain point, you got to do something with that, like, because you can just keep learning forever and learn and learn and learn and learn and learn and just thinking about it and learning but then taking new action, right? Doing something with what you're learning, that's what's going to lead you forward. Because until you take new action, that knowledge is just potential power. But yeah, that is the next positive step. And it is a way to redirect it. Just like the person earlier who mentioned the eating disorder, right? A positive way to redirect the eating disorder is healthy eating. So instead of anorexia or bulimia or some other eating disorder, redirecting all that energy and focus to learning about some kind of, new thing that makes sense for you. Like for this person, it was the vegan diet. For someone else, it might be some other, form of diet or nutrition or, lifestyle around food and that sort of thing. And so then you become like almost obsessed with that, right? Like now you start buying healthy foods. Now you start preparing these foods for yourself. And like, you're taking this action and you're investing a lot of time and energy in that. But that's a healthy thing, right? It's like you've redirected all of the negative energy that was going toward the eating disorder. And now you've channeled that into a positive, healthy thing that you're doing for yourself. So doing something positive with that, that being the difference is like the intent, right? The intent of what you're doing. Like, are you just stewing in it and just sitting in this, like this beaten down, state where you're disempowered because you're still in the victim because there's someone to blame? Or are you empowering yourself and learning things and then starting to take new actions, right? So that would be the difference that I would say between the two. Can you suggest some books to read for self-healing? Yes. So specifically on the narcissistic abuse, is that what you're talking about? There's so many books. So The Psychopath Free being like the first book that I would go to, Jackson Mackenzie. Ross Rosenberg's The Human Magnet Syndrome, that was fantastic. There's a book called Emotional Blackmail. I can't remember that author. I just read that a couple weeks ago. It was really good. She talks about emotional blackmail. It was written like in the 90s, I think. So it was before this huge wave of understanding, that Dr. George Simon really spearheaded, which was that traditional psychology does not apply to these character disturbed types. And this was like a brand new revolutionary idea towards, the late 90s. This book was written before that. So this woman isn't really calling it out. In fact, at some of the points I'm like, because it's almost like I would have made that cut without continuing dialogue with this manipulative person, and it's like she's like encouraging people to keep engaging with it. The benefit that I got out of that book was the concept of emotional blackmail, and how that plays out in relationships, and how to recognize it, some ways that you can try to deal with it and to see if that person is responsive. And if that person is not responsive, then you're dealing with the character disturbed types. And then I would go to Dr. George Simon's book, In Sheep's Clothing, an amazing book. I haven't read his other books. That's on my list to do soon. If you were raised by a narcissistic parent, particularly a mother, there's a book called Will I Ever Be Good Enough? Healing the Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers. That's a really great book. Also books like Toxic Parents. There's a book called Codependent No More. I didn't really love that book. I also thought it was kind of like the old paradigm. I didn't get a lot out of that, but it might speak to more people than it spoke to me. And then, depending like how like holistic you want to get with your healing, authors like Eckhart Tolle, Louise Hay, who else? So many. I need to put together like a list. I should do that on my website. Just put together like lists of books. They may not be for everybody. Some people may not be into the holistic stuff or the spiritual stuff, and they may be more into like the psychology aspects. But depending on what you're looking for, I could possibly come up with some more suggestions for you. And I'm going to note that to put that on the website in the login area, because I'm going to make this announcement again so more people can hear. If you know of a good therapist, if you have worked with a therapist in your local area who understands narcissistic abuse recovery, like they really get it, and they're not blaming you, and they're not continuing to like encourage you to keep engaging with these people, and saying things like, well, why would you punish your parent by going no contact? As long as they're not using this kind of language, like they really actually understand it and they're helping empower you and helping you self-heal, I would like their names like worldwide, because people are all over the place, in my network. And I want to have a list of these therapists in local areas that people can seek out. They can look in their local area and see if someone's on this list, to help them with the PTSD or the CPTSD and the abuse recovery, because it could be really important. And then, I've just heard so many bad stories of people getting involved with therapists who were just clueless and didn't understand, and maybe they didn't have a malintention, but they just really confused the person more. Or worse yet, the stories of people who for decades sought out therapy from narcissists, not knowing, and they got even more abused, similar to like the kind of like a spiritual kind of abuse, where this is like a person in a position of authority and you've gone there for some kind of healing. That can be really devastating. So I want to create this list of, really knowledgeable, skillful, understanding therapists in the field that people can refer to. So along that lines, maybe I'll put together one of these lists of, things to read for self-healing. Something someone mentioned last week, it was in the later session, they mentioned transactional analysis, and I hadn't heard of this before. And someone sent me even like a video, I think, of the founder. It was like an interview with him. It was really hard for me to pay attention. I couldn't listen to it much, but then I watched a really fantastic video. It was like animated, explaining what it is. I really recommend checking that out. Transactional analysis. You see like a cartoon, it was like stick figures or something, like showing what's happening, the parent and the child and the adult, and what happens in relationships and how you can get hooked into those same dynamics. Really great for self-healing those parts of you that keep getting hooked into that dynamic with people, whether they're people at work or relationships and whatnot. But I will put together more of a list. And I just realized it's been 2 hours. Time is flying by. I'm going to copy what's left in the chat. I'm going to wrap it up now. I'm going to copy these things, and I can pull out some of the questions in the later session to get things rolling then. I'm sorry, I didn't realize things were flying by so quickly. But thank you all so much for showing up today, for contributing your questions and your understanding and being there for each other as well. So I'm sending you all a big hug, and I hope to see you soon.